I'd like to welcome everybody, wish everybody a good evening. We have gathered here this evening, as we have every year for many, many decades, to ensure that we never forget. The byword of this evening, as we have just seen on the screen, is Zachor, which is to remember. We remember the Shoah and all its horrors. We remember the vicious anti-Semites, the Nazis, and all the rest of the Jew haters who absorbed their hatred through their mother's milk. Most of all, we remember the victims of the Holocaust. Well over 6 million Jews who perished, innocent people who were terrorized, brutalized, tortured, murdered. Their only crime was that they were Jewish. They were all holy martyrs who died sanctifying the name of God. So we remember. But there's still another Zachor, something to remember this evening, and that is that despite the unique and diabolical campaign to wipe every Jew off the face of the earth, which was the ultimate goal of the final solution, it does not stand alone. It's not an isolated event that's apart from the rest of the campaigns in Jewish history to terrorize and murder Jews. The Shoah was a link, a major link, but only a link in that chain of diabolical evil perpetrated against the Jewish people. The Jewish travelogue of blood, death, and destruction goes back at least 2,000 years. And despite our very brief respite, our oasis in time for the past 6 or 7 decades, it reared its ugly head, its ugly face, almost 2 years ago on October 7th, 2023. So Zachor, we should remember and not forget that too much of the enlightened world turned their backs on Israel and on the Jewish people. The great universities, Ivy League quality, soon were championing the terrorists and not the victims. They openly displayed their backing of terror groups and the destruction of the state of Israel. Much of the world saw that the nation that was the victim is the victimizer. They saw and see the hostages not as hostages, but as prisoners of war. Zachor, we should never forget this. Cornell University, just as an example, one of the finest seats of higher learning, just didn't realize that they invited an arch anti-Semite and hater of Israel who wants Israel gone and its inhabitants in hell to come and entertain their students, their scholars. What a tragic error, not realizing that. The ADL just this week published that the past year there were a horrifying uptick in level of anti-Semitic incidents. Just this year alone, 9,354 reported incidents in the United States alone. An astonishing, a horrifying number. So Zachor, this week a great spiritual individual passed away. And we heard that this is one of the most compassionate human beings who ever walked this earth. He was kind to the poor. He was kind to the indigent. He was kind to the handicapped. He was kind to all human beings, except for the inhabitants of the state of Israel. For some reason, the state of Israel and the Jewish people are always treated differently than anybody else. So that's what we try to remember, Zachor. So we're all enjoined to remember this evening and always. Zachor al tishkach. It's a very great pleasure for me to welcome. First, we have a beautiful group of people who have come together, and it's something which is very wonderful for the communities to come together as one for a situation such as this, for a commemoration such as this. So to welcome the rabbis who are here, Rabbi Evan Hoffman, who is the rabbi of Congregation Anshe Shalom here in New Rochelle, Rabbi of Fleetwood Synagogue of Mount Vernon, Rabbi Chaim Marder, who is the rabbi at the Hebrew Institute of White Plains, Rabbi Mitchell Serrels, our longtime friend, the rabbi of Magen David Sephardic congregation, Rabbi Yaakov Bienenfeld, who is the rabbi of Young Israel of Harrison, Rabbi Jonathan Morgenstern, who is the rabbi at Young Israel of Scarsdale, and Rabbi Shmuel Greenberg, one of our great heroes, the rabbi of Young Israel of White Plains. So we all noticed that when Rabbi Mejerowicz walked in, that everybody had a smile on their face. Not only did they have a smile on their face, but they had looks of gratitude on their faces, and everybody wanted to just come and say a few words. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that because we had to proceed with the evening's events and the program. But it speaks to the quality of Rabbi Mejerowicz. Rabbi Mejerowicz was the principal of the Hebrew High School of Westchester for over 40 years, over 40 decades of dedicated service. He was a Rebbe. He was a French teacher. He was a person who was a mentor to the teachers. He was a Bal Eitzah to the students. And he was a person that you can come into. You can always walk into his office if you had a problem, and he was there, and he would take care of your issues, as a father would for a child. That's the type of principal that he was, a compassionate father for the young men and women who are just growing up and who need guidance and who need somebody they can trust. And Rabbi Mejerowicz was that person. But Rabbi Mejerowicz came with a totally different quality, which is a quality which is rare and a quality which, as the rabbis say, chaval da'avdim v'lo mishtachin. That quality does not really exist anymore. He came with an old world tradition. He came with a tradition of Judaism that went back over 1,000 years. And he had the ability to impart that tradition in a modern way, in a contemporary way. But he was able to impart that tradition to thousands upon thousands of students, which make up the next generation, the next 2 generations of Jews. And it's therefore a very great honor, a great pleasure to introduce Rabbi Mejerowicz.
Whatever, I don't know.
Here. That's the best. I'll help you out, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Is it okay? Make sure you have it right in your mouth. Okay? You need to put anything in on you. You want to sit, Rabbi, or no? No, I think you sit. If you need a seat, tell me. I'm going to sit down, Rabbi.
Kvoid Moed Asra, Rafink Shashita, Kvoid Rabbonim, Rabbi Yisai. I want to thank David and Rafi Kalman for bringing me here today. This is a place where I spent 32 beautiful years in this community, teaching wonderful students, and I'm coming back to friends. I'm coming home. As Ruth said, the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, Ami Onochi Yeshoves. I came back to stay with my people. I'm also thankful that I had such a wonderful bunch of teachers that I was able to be part of. I have come to love them and honor them and trust them. To my students, you'll never know how much I love you. A few weeks ago, I had a conversation with some not young men, people in their 70s. You know, as I told David and Rafi, in the morning when I brush my teeth, there's an old man that looks at me through the mirror. I wonder what he's doing there every morning. Be it as it may, I spoke to these people, and in the conversation something came up, and I said that my mother, Allah Shalom, when we spoke of Mengele, she said she's not afraid of the Malach HaMoves. She met him twice. His name is Joseph Mengele. And she described him as a tall, blue-eyed, with murderous eyes. He was the one who stood on the platform when people came to Auschwitz. Right, left, right, left. To pick up on what Rabbi Fink said, the Sefer HaChinuch, Mitzvah 603, Tov Resh Gimel, is the Mitzvah of Zohar. There the Chinuch quotes a Sifrei. And the Sifrei says the following. Zohar es asher osa lecha Amalek, and 3 psukim later it says lo tishkach. And the question is, what is the difference between Zohar and lo tishkach? And the Chinuch says the following. Zohar shetehei shoyne beficha. Remember to speak lo tishkach, because this is the way you won't forget. So that when I spoke to these men, and one of them did not recognize the name Mengele, and did not know what selection was, I was so upset that when David called me, I didn't let him finish his invitation, and I grabbed it to come and speak with you. Reb Shlomo Bobover, the Bobover Rebbe, once spoke to a group of men, and he told them that very often in the morning, he stands at this window, which is on the same block as the yeshiva, and buses are bringing children to yeshiva. But he doesn't see buses. What he sees are trucks. And these trucks are taking away children from their parents to concentration camps. But then he blinks his eyes and he looks, Baruch Hashem, these are buses bringing kinderlich to Cheder, kinderlich to yeshiva, little girls to their schools. I can tell you that Baruch Hashem, every morning when I go from shul, I live a block away from my shul. Yet, every few seconds, I have the privilege of making a bracha for these children. Kinderlich, Geistgesundheit, children go in good health. My father, Hashem Yakim Dama, was born in Wieruszow, Poland, which is the bad luck of being close to the German border and to the Polish border. And borders move. So they were beneficial they benefited from both the anti-Semitism of the Germans and the anti-Semitism of the Polish. My father came to France in 1925 because my grandfather had left in 1920. There was no parnassa. And he came to France. 5 years later, he was able to bring his family. My mother, Allah Shalom, came from Munkac, actually a little town outside of Munkac, via Wyszwiżnice. And in 1939, she came from Holland to visit her sisters who lived in France. You know what happened in 1939? The war broke out and she was stuck. So together with all the Jews, they fled southward toward Marseille. She eventually ended up in Lyon, where she met my father. They were married in 1941. I still have the ksuba. How it survived, I don't know. In 1942, I was born. By that time, France had already been divided into two. La France libre et la France de Vichy. French, Free French, which was supposedly Vichy France, and the occupied part, which was Paris. So they split in the middle. Maréchal Pétain was the president. Pierre Laval was the premier. They were both collaborators with the Germans. Pierre Laval was executed, but Pétain was not. He was under house arrest for the rest of his life because during World War I, he had been a hero for the French army. Remember that after Kristallnacht in 1941, the Germans in Nuremberg created Jewish anti-Semitic laws. Well, the other country, and the only other country, not Poland, not Hungary, not Italy, but France. The France of Pierre Laval had anti-Semitic laws as well. A law that allowed French Jews to be stripped of their citizenship. We were in hiding, but to have a little child around when you're hiding is difficult, lest he cry and give up everything. So I was placed in the convent. So if you want to know where my original religion came from, that's where it started. Actually, I most probably knew the Pater Noster before I knew Shema. Klaus Barbie was the SS Gestapo in charge of the Lyon area. He personally was responsible for 100,000 Jews to be deported to concentration camps and to be killed. That earned him the title of the Butcher of Lyon. My parents were able to escape being caught until July 31st. No, until June of 1944. For those of you who have a Hungarian background, you will know that that is just after Eichmann in Mejerowicz was in charge of liquidating all of Hungarian Jewry. He killed 500,000 Jews in 6 weeks. If you know Hungarian Jews that survived the war, they all have yahrzeit between Pesach and Shavuos. A person by the name of Serge Klagsfeld, who was a Nazi hunter after the war, wrote a book, Les enfants de la maison des dieux. It is a story of the last convoy leaving France before France was liberated. And of course, Germans wanted Pünktlichkeit, exact numbers. And because, and this is what he tells in the story, and because they were missing, there were still empty spots, they went to the Maison des Yeux, which was an orphanage, and took children out there to complete the numbers and send them to Auschwitz. So when Seth Klarsfeld wrote this book, I read it, and I wrote him a letter. I said, you know what, I think that's my mother's convoy. Because she used to tell a similar story, that when they left, there were empty spaces, so the Gestapo went to an orphanage and took out children to complete the numbers. He wrote me back, says, no, your parents were in Convoy 77. The way he knew that is because he compiled a list based on German archives, you know how pünktlich they are, of every deportee from France. And there, the names of my parents were listed, the day they were deported, the convoy they were on, and where they were from, and where they were born. So he sent me that copy. So my parents actually were arrested at Fort Montluc in Villeurbanne, which is a part of Lyon. And after they were arrested, they were going to be shipped to Drancy. My mother found out that one of the inmates, a non-Jewish girl, was going to be freed because the Gestapo made a mistake thinking she was Jewish. So she sent out a message with this girl, and she said for me to be taken out of the convent. If I were to die, I would die a Jew. That young lady thought it might be behind the Gestapo was doing that. She was afraid to pass on the message. But she told her brother, who was afraid there was a master of the Gestapo. Eventually it came to the attention of a maid of ours who was afraid, but eventually spoke to my aunt. And my aunt went down to the orphanage, to the convent, and asked for me, and they gave me up. And she said, don't you need any proof of who I am? No. If the Germans came, I would do the same thing. These were the people who were saving my life. My parents were on Transport 77, as I told you, and on July 31st, they made their way to Drancy, near Paris. This was 17 days before the liberation of France. Two convoys were still going then to Auschwitz. In my parents' transport, there were 1,309 people, including 324 children. They arrived on August 3rd in Auschwitz. Yud Dalet Av. That is when I have your sight. Because my mother witnessed Mengele sending my father to the left, even though he was 33 years old. Send him to the left, and she saw him being marched off to the gas chambers and to the crematoria. So I know exactly when I have yahrzeits. Of the 1,309 people who were sent on this convoy 77, this transport 77, only 250 people survived. 847 were murdered the day they arrived to Auschwitz. I'm old enough to remember the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Israel. He had been captured by the Shin Bet. He was in Argentina, hiding in Argentina. And throughout the trial, he sat in a glass case with a rictus on his face, a half smile. And every question that the prosecution asked, the answer was zum Befehl, as per order. The day he was hung, when he was going to be hung already, he stood near the gallows. He was asked if he had anything to say. He said yes. And he said, I'm only sorry that I did not finish the job. My brother-in-law, who Rabbi Fink knows well, Moti, used to be very active in the Chevra Kedisha. One day he knew I was going to Levaya, to a funeral, and he approached me with a bar of soap. The mace was going to be buried in Israel. That bar of soap had 2 letters on it, J.F., Judenfatz, had been produced with Jewish fat, body fat. Later that year, a friend of mine, Bernie Schwartz, brought to shul on Rosh Hashanah a shofar that his father brought back from Auschwitz, who had been blown in Auschwitz. He also had a machzor that had been written in Auschwitz. It was pieces of cement sacks. And whoever remembered anything of the tefillot wrote them down. And they were sewn together. And he gave them to me to hold. To say that I was shaking is the understatement. Let me tell you a story. My mother, Al-Hashem, used to say that Yom Kippur, Tov Shin Hey, 1944, she was in Auschwitz. And she said, I don't know how, but somehow 2 candles appeared in the bunker house. I don't know how they got there, but I can tell you that the koilos, the cries, the boruches went straight to heaven. A A few years ago, Rafi invited me to his school to be interviewed for a program called Names, Not Numbers. The 8th grader interviewed me, filmed me, and I gave them a chance to ask questions at the end. And one of the young men got up and said, "Rabbi, why should we be religious?" And my answer was, because Hitler cannot win this war. He destroyed schools. We will fill schools. We will come to daven, Shachas Mincha Maariv. We will have learning. He killed 1.5 million children. I think it's more. We must bear more children. We must educate more children. We must teach Torah to more children. We must make proud Jews out of our children. Let me finish with something which is more Libidic. I was privileged to attend a Siyum HaShas in MetLife in the Meadowlands. With close to 100,000 Jews. I have never seen a more beautiful picture than that. And I was privileged that in my rows of seats, where I sat were my children and grandchildren. My wife and I dream that if God gives us health and years, at the next Yom HaShoah, which is about 2.5 years. For you, it's not much. For me, it is. I hope that we will be able to add our great-grandchildren to that row of seats. Let me finish by showing you something that hangs in my house, so people will not ask, what is the Shoah? This Star of David, which we call the Gelish Matte, the yellow rag, hangs in my house. It belonged to my parents. Thank you very much.
This past year and a half, we've all become very familiar with Sefer Tehillim, the Book of Psalms, with the words of Melech David, with the words of King David. After every prayer service, after every tefillah, we all say Tehillim. We've been saying Tehillim. This became part of our routine for the last year and a half. We say Tehillim For the sick, we say Tehillim when people are in danger. We say Tehillim for difficult times. And we also say Tehillim to merit and to honor all the souls, the holy souls, the Kedoshim that have passed. Rabbi Mejerowicz definitely honored all those souls with his wonderful words, with his emotional, meaningful words. And we all want to thank Rabbi Mejerowicz for coming here and for honoring us, for being here, and for being part of this program this evening. Yasher Koach. You should have good health and nachas straight until 120, and many, many smachot in your life. The words of Melech David, of King David, still resonate with us today. And now we are going to say the Tehillim to merit as a zchut for all of those that perished in the Holocaust. Please rise as we say Perek Tehillim Kuf Chaf Aleph, chapter 121. Shir lamalos esoinai el hehorim meyayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shomayim b'horetz. Al yitain lamot raglecha, al yanum shomrecha. Hinehi lo yanum v'lo yishan, shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilecha, al yad yeminecha. Yomam Hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach baloila. Adonai yishmarecha mikol ra, yishmar es nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzeisecha uvoecha meyata v'adolam.
Tonight, we honor the 6 million men, women, and children whose lives were tragically cut short in the Shoah. We will now ask 6 members of our community to light candles in memory of their family members who perished and to share their own stories of survival. As each candle lighter is called to light a candle, please give your attention to the video screens. Robert Kopel, please come forward to light a candle on behalf of your mother, Vera Kopel.
My mother, Vera Hausen Kopel, was born in 1935 in Budapest, Hungary. When she was 8 years old, her father was taken to a slave labor camp where he died on the day of liberation at age 36. In 1944, my grandmother was able to obtain safe certificates, known as Schutzpass, from Raoul Wallenberg, which allowed my mother and grandmother to live in a safe house for several months. When the house became too dangerous, my grandmother placed my mother in an orphanage while she planned their next move to evade the Nazis. After several months, my grandmother courageously rescued my mother, and together they hid in an empty house outside of town until the end of the war. Later, they found out that this house was located right next to Gestapo headquarters. In 1957, after the Hungarian Revolution, my mother and grandmother came to America with freedom fighters. That same year, my mother married Andrei Kopel. My mother has 1 child, 3 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren. I light this candle on behalf of my mother in memory of her father, Leosh Hausen, Yehuda ben Ephraim, and other family members who perished in the Holocaust.
Dr. Ruth Freeman Lewis, please come forward to light a candle.
Ruth Freiman Lewis was born in Frankfurt am Main, Germany, the youngest of 4 children. When she was born, the Nuremberg laws were already in effect, and her father's profession as a doctor was severely limited. Before Kristallnacht, her family had moved into the already deported rabbi's apartment attached to the shul. The family's lives were saved when they were alerted that the front of the shul was on fire, and they escaped the blaze. The next morning, her father was taken to Buchenwald with all the other Jewish men, over 20. Her father was released after 6 weeks because his wife submitted his Iron Cross, a medal for fighting for Germany in World War I. Shortly thereafter, Ruth, at 2 years of age, was sent on a kinder transport with her 3 older siblings, ages 4, 5, and 7. After a year, her parents reunited with their children in England. The family immigrated to America on the ship Cameronia on its last successful transatlantic voyage before being torpedoed by a Nazi U-boat. They arrived in New York in 1940. Her father practiced as an internist until his retirement at age 85. Ruth, as a girl, often accompanied her father in his practice. She went to Hunter College, and at 19 she was accepted to the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. She later returned as a faculty member and recently retired as a full professor of medicine and obstetrics and gynecology. Ruth and her husband, Alav Shalom, had 3 children, 11 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren.
Yosei Kaltoff, please come forward to light a candle.
Yosei Kaltoff was born during World War II in Amsterdam, where she lived with her parents. In 1942, when the Germans invaded Amsterdam, her mother found a place for the 2 of them to hide, but her father was sent on a transport to Auschwitz, where he perished. At 4 months old, her mother gave her to strangers to ensure her safety, and she was raised by a devout Protestant family who loved her dearly. When the war was over and Yosei was 3, her mother returned from hiding and retrieved her. Yosei always loved her foster family and stayed in touch with them until they died at an elderly age. She believes that the people who raised her, at great risk to themselves, were true heroes. Yosei moved to New York permanently in 1962. She worked in the jewelry district and then in her husband's podiatry practice. She lives in New Rochelle and has 2 children and 3 grandchildren. Yosei Kaltoff lights this candle in memory of her father, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who all perished in the Holocaust.
Vera Blau, please come forward to light a candle.
My name is Vera Blau. I was born in Budapest, Hungary. I am a Holocaust child survivor born in 1941. When I was born, my mother and father had put Protestant on my birth certificate in order to save me. During the Holocaust, I was hidden by a family. The woman was Jewish and the husband was Christian. According to the laws in Hungary, they were not harmed because the husband was not Jewish, and half-Jewish couples were considered not to be a Jewish couple. His name was Uncle Lajos. My father knew his wife from the office where they worked. During the war, my mother was hiding with fast papers. My father was in a small camp close to the Austrian border. He was very sick with high fever. He had typhus. He was very hungry, went outside to get raw corn from the cornfield. The Nazis were controlling the area. They shot him on March 28, 1945, just one day before Hungary was liberated. He was only 37 years old. I light this candle for my father, Dr. Eugene Boyza.
Theda Parachia, please come forward to light a candle on behalf of your mother, Doreen Parachia.
My mother, Doreen Pariah, was born in 1924 in Naples, Italy, the oldest of 4 children. Her parents were born in Salonika, Greece. In 1939, the Italian police came to their door, and because Mom's parents were Greek citizens, the family was given 1 hour to leave Naples. The family fled to her aunt and uncle in Salonika, Greece. In 1940, when Mom was 15, her father sent her and her 12-year-old brother, Sal, by boat to an uncle in the Bronx, New York. Mom traveled to Bari, Italy in September 1948 to find the family's sole Salonika survivor, her first cousin, my father, Isaac Eno Pariah, whom she married later that September of 1948. My father, who was born in Salonika, Greece, survived 3 concentration camps, Auschwitz, Dachau, and Mauthausen, where he saw his mother and 2 of his sisters in the line headed for the gas chamber. He was liberated from Mauthausen on May 5, 1945. I light this candle in memory of my mother and father, Doreen and Eno Pariah.
Greenblatt, please come forward to light a candle on behalf of your mother, Sidonia Greenblatt.
My mother, Sidonia Greenblatt, née Hollander, was born on September 27, 1927, the 4th of 6 children, in a Hasidic family in the Czech border town of Muzhiovo. It was a pastoral town in the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains where some 400 Jews lived peacefully with their non-Jewish neighbors until World War II. When the Nazis appeared suddenly in their town on the first day of Pesach in 1944, my mother and her family were herded into the back room of their house while the Germans quartered troops in the front room. My grandfather conducted the second Seder by heart, in a hushed tone and without any matzah or props. From there, they were taken to the ghetto in Berehovo, where they remained until being deported by cattle cart to Auschwitz. They arrived at the infamous Birkenau ramp a day before Shavuot in 1944. My grandmother, who refused to let go of the hand of my 9-year-old uncle, went straight to the gas chamber with him. My grandfather, who was never seen again but ultimately died at another satellite camp, was also stripped from his family. My mother owed her survival at Auschwitz to her older sister, who kept her alive to the very end, through the starvation, beatings, and ultimately the death march that began on January 18, 1945, and ended in Bergen-Belsen, where she was liberated by the British Army in the spring of 1945. My mother wound up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan after the war, where she married my father of blessed memory, himself a Hungarian refugee who had gotten out in time. They raised a family and never looked back. My mother's triumph was her survival and the perpetuation of the Jewish values ingrained in her by her parents and grandparents. I light this candle on my mother's behalf for my grandparents and uncle who perished in the Shoah.
Good evening. My name is Susie Myers, and I'm the proud granddaughter of Holocaust survivors Isaac and Adela Engel. Growing up, my siblings and I always knew this about ourselves. We were the grandchildren of survivors. I can't pinpoint exactly when we knew or how we learned it. It wasn't a single moment or conversation. It was simply woven into the fabric of our lives. It was part of who we were, almost as if it was in our DNA. I was reminded of this at last year's Yom HaShoah program at Young Israel of Scarsdale. There was a panel of grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, and then when they were asked, when did you first learn you were a grandchild of survivors, every panelist had a similar response. They didn't remember a specific moment. They had just always known. My sister and I discussed it afterward and realized we felt the same. For many of us, this knowledge is passed down quietly, naturally, becoming an essential part of our identity from an early age. As children, we would gather for dinner at our grandparents' home every Sunday night. After the meal, the grandchildren were sent off to the den to watch TV, while the adults stayed behind listening as my grandfather shared stories from his time during the war. Even though we weren't in the room, we felt the weight of those stories. They were always present, part of the air we breathed. I remember when my mother first traveled to Poland. My grandfather was strongly opposed to her going. I can still hear his words. "Why are you going there? There's nothing left, only bad memories." Yet years later, when I participated in March of the Living during my year in Israel, his response was different. He told me, "Make sure you visit the cemetery where my grandfather is buried. Have someone say Kaddish for him." This shift meant something. Among her siblings, my mother was the one who held the most detailed account of my grandparents' story. My cousins often urged her to write it down so that we could pass it on to our children and someday to theirs. Tonight, you, my siblings, and one of my cousins will have the chance to hear a small but powerful part of my grandparents' story as told by my mother. Even I learned new things through this process, but what struck me most was something deeper. I used to say that survivors of the Shoah had a survival mentality and were, as my mother would say, geribben. But in hearing my mother recount my grandfather's story, I realized he saw it differently. His perspective on survival was not only about endurance, it carried meaning, faith, and purpose. Before I introduce my mother, there's one thought I would like to leave you all with. Each year, my husband Jeff and I attend the community Yom Hashoah program in our area. I'm often struck by how few young people attend. And when I say young, I mean anyone under 70. I implore each of you to continue showing up to these programs so that together we ensure we never forget. And please encourage your friends and neighbors to join you, as we have so painfully witnessed over the past 18 months. Never again is now. We must remain vigilant. We must preserve and share these stories while we still can. And now it is my honor to introduce the person who has carried this legacy with such care and clarity, my mother, Toby Schlussel.
Thank you, Susie. I am not a Holocaust survivor, but I am the eldest child of two Polish Holocaust survivors. My parents endured 5.5 years of unimaginable horror, and I was born in Bergen-Belsen after the war when it became a displaced persons camp. My parents were not married before the war. They did not know each other. They were from different cities, from different parts of the country. They were very young. My husband used to say that every Holocaust survivor could write a book about their war experiences. But we do not have time tonight to unpack 2 books. But with your indulgence, I would like to share with you a few defining moments from each of their stories. I would like to start with my father, Moshe Eliezer ben Harav Avraham Yehoshua Aryeh V'Yitalea Bonhart Engel, Isaac Engel. He was born and raised in Zvolin, Poland, a small town of 5,000 to 6,000 people between Radom and Lublin. 95% of the inhabitants of Zvolin were Jewish. The Poles were farmers that lived outside of the city. The family lived in the town square, the Marek, as the Jews called it. My father was the middle of 3 sons of a prominent Hasidic family. His father had smicha from the Alter Ostrovtzer Rebbe, but he was not a practicing rabbi. They owned the largest hardware store in Zvolin, and they lived above it. When the Germans invaded Poland, their part of the town square was bombed and destroyed. The family relocated to another home and built a hidden room where my father hid when the Germans came looking for young men. In October 1942, on Holomoid Sukkot, a neighbor burst into their sukkah with a chilling warning. Avramcha, tomorrow we are going to be taken away. Where is God? My grandfather responded, I cannot answer that, but we should not go willingly. We should take a few of them with us. Both he and my father were small, short, but very strong men. My father was convinced that he did not go without putting up a fight. My father worked in a German-run waterworks, and they were told that the workers would be spared during the town's liquidation. The day that the city was going to be liquidated of Jews, my father woke up at 5 in the morning, pumped a barrel of water for his parents and his little brother, Simcha Bunim, who was 7 years old. His older brother, Gavriel, already had joined the partisans. His parents and his little brother had bread, and they stayed in the hidden room. My father padlocked the door to the house and reported to work. The Germans told the workers at the waterworks that they had changed their mind, and the workers would be the first group to be liquidated. The Germans marched groups of 500 people at a time towards the train station. It was unusually warm and dry that Sukkot, and it was the harvest season, so there were haystacks all over the fields. They would not let the Jews walk on the pavement, but they were forced to walk on the side of the road. 500 people walking at the same time produced a tremendous amount of dust and particles in the air. There was sagebrush and bushes on the side of the road. They were surrounded by Ukrainians. My father knew that if they got close to the train station, he had no chance of escape, as it was surrounded by barbed wire and was heavily guarded. In order to escape, my father told one of the Ukrainian guards that he had to relieve himself, but the guard told him to continue walking. He then made his way to the edge of the group towards the bushes, and he slipped into one of those bushes. When the entire group marched by, he went into one of the haystacks in the field, and he made 2 small openings so he could see what was happening. When he saw the Judenrat go by, he knew that was the last group. At this point, it was evening. He came out of the haystack, and he saw a few other boys did the same thing that he did. But where do you go? As I mentioned, my father's family was in the hardware business. Once or twice a week, it was market day. It was always very busy on those days, and everyone in the family would be working in the store. On one of those days, a farmer came in. My grandfather never saw him before. He was not a regular customer. The farmer told my grandfather that he had had a fire and that everything he had burnt down, and he needed to rebuild. But he did not have the money to pay for everything all at once. He asked if my grandfather would give him all of the materials on credit, and every time he would come for market day, he would redeem one of the notes of credit. My grandfather agreed, and one day when he came to redeem a note, another Pole saw him give my grandfather the zlota, which is the Polish money, for one of the notes. And he said to him, "You trust a Jew with that kind of money?" And he answered, "He trusted me with more." The farmer lived in the Garbatka area, not too far away. My father knew that area because they would go on vacation there in the summer. My father decided to go to that farmer. He took the few other boys that had also escaped with him. The farmer knew exactly what was happening. He milked a cow and gave them bread and that milk. They had not eaten since 5 in the morning. He gave them a place to sleep that night. The next morning, my father made his way back to Zvolin. He left the other boys at the farm. There was a Pole, a Mr. Zacharkiewicz, who lived on the same street as the church, which was in the town. He was from one of the intelligentsia families of Zvolin. He worked for my father's grandfather before my father's grandfather moved back to Lublin. And then Zacharkiewicz became a carpenter and bought merchandise from my father's father. During the beginning of the war, he would buy merchandise from my grandfather even if he didn't need it, so that the family would have some money. My father went to Mr. Zacharkiewicz's store, and Mr. Zacharkiewicz quickly took him up to his living quarters because the Germans were coming into the store all of the time, and he knew it was not safe for my father to be there. My father asked him to go to the house to see if his family was still there. Zacharkiewicz came back and said no one was there, and the padlock was open. My father then wrote a note in Yiddish to the head of the Jewish police in Zvolin. His name was a Mr. Weintraub. They had been neighbors of my grandparents. The note asked if he had seen my father's family, if they were killed, or if they were taken away. Zacharkiewicz delivered the note, and Weintraub wrote back that he did not see them, they were not killed or taken away. So my father made his way back to the farmer. That night, he overheard through the walls a friend of the farmer's son who came to visit, telling the son, if you turn in a Jew, the Germans will give you a bottle of vodka and a carton of cigarettes. My father knew that it was no longer safe to stay there. But where do you go now? Outside of Zvolin, there was a government-run potato farm called Polichna. Once the war started, the Germans took it over. At the beginning of the war, the Germans were sending Jews there. The Jews would bribe the Germans not to be sent there. Later, when it became one of the last safe havens, the Jews were bribing the Germans to get into Polichna. My father made his way to Polichna. The Jewish foreman told him that he could not allow my father to enter because there was a count, and if the tally was not correct, his head would roll. Just then, a German rode by on a horse and asked my father if he would work, and my father said yes, and he told the foreman to let him in. A day or two later, some new Jewish recruits were brought into Polichna. One of them recognized my father, and he told him he had just seen his parents and little brother in the next town over, which was called Chepela, and that his father had with him only his talis and tefillin, and he was only worried about what happened to my father. My father managed to leave Polichna and make his way on the back roads to Chepela. As I mentioned, it was harvest time. One of the farmers saw him, and he immediately recognized him as a Jew. And he said to him in Polish, "Jew boy, don't go there. They're rounding up all of the Jews." Everyone from that area was taken to Treblinka, so my father returned to Polichna. They picked potatoes until December, and then he was sent to his first major concentration camp, Skarżysko-Kamienny. The inmates there worked for a munitions company called Hassak, Hugo Schneider Gesellschaft. My father told me 50,000 bullets passed through his hands every day there. He was there for a year and a half, an unusually long time for such brutal conditions. You could not exist on the food rations that were given. The machines were run with vegetable oil. The Jewish inmates would drink this oil until the Nazis realized it, and then they poisoned it. They packaged the bullets with brown paper and secured them with woven ribbons. Those ribbons could be very useful. They could be used to make blankets and sandals, and the Jews would steal them and trade them for food from the Poles that came into the camp to work. The Poles did not come in for the few zlota that they were paid, but to steal bullets for the resistance. If the Germans caught anyone stealing, they would give you a few whacks. But if you were caught stealing bullets, they would kill you. As the Allies were coming, the Germans kept retreating, and my father was taken to Częstochowa, and then to Gross Rosen, and then to Nordhausen. These were all concentration camps. He described Nordhausen as a hellhole. No food, no work. It was impossible to keep clean. He became so weak that when he sat down, he couldn't get up. And when he got up, he could not sit down. Periodically, the Germans came through asking for Jews that had specific skills. Whatever they asked for, he raised his hand. They didn't take him the first or second time, but they took him the third time. They were asking for a schlaffer. It was on-the-job training for him. They took him to a camp called Dora, where they made the V-1, V-2 missiles that they bombed England with. The German scientists that worked on these missiles were later divided up by the Russians and the US for their space programs. My father described the camp as a horrible camp, but those who worked in the tunnel where my father worked got preferential treatment. When they came, they gave the Jews showers, fresh uniforms, and a whole bread. He had not seen a whole bread in years. He tried to save some for later, but he was so starved that he ate the entire loaf. My father worked under a civilian German engineer who would give him news about what was happening in the war, and if he had a sandwich or a drink that he did not finish, he would give it to my father. As the Allies were coming closer, the Nazis were going to take the tunnel workers, put them in the tunnel, and bomb it shut. But a civilian German physician who saved and helped many Jews convinced them to take the Jews with them. He told them that maybe the Jews would prove to be useful, and they brought them to Bergen-Belsen. The Bergen-Belsen camp was full of typhus. The Germans were not worried about the Jews getting the typhus, but were worried about their own health. The war was coming to an end. The Wehrmacht, the general German army, whose barracks were just outside of Bergen-Belsen, had already left, so they took the Jews to those barracks. There was no food, no work, and 2 weeks later, the camp was liberated by the British. The last week of the war, a new group of Jews were brought to the same barracks in Bergen-Belsen. One of those prisoners was my mother's second oldest brother, Yankel Ehrenfried. He was in the same barracks as my father. As I mentioned earlier, Bergen-Belsen was full of typhus. No matter how hard they tried, the British could not get rid of it. Finally, they burnt down the camp and rebuilt it as a DP camp some kilometers away. And now my mother's story. My mother, Idel Bas Mendel Shaya and Toby Greitzer Ehrenfried, Adela Ehrenfried Engel, was born and raised in Olkusz, Poland, a town of about 50 to 60,000 people near Sosnowiec and Krakow. She was the sixth of 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. Every Polish girl knew how to sew, but my mother must have shown a special talent for it because her parents sent her to tailor school. She did have an uncle who had a tailor shop on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. It was in the genes. Early on, when the Germans came in, they asked if anyone had any special skills, and you should register, and they would register with that skill. She registered as a tailor. They sent her to the bigger city of Sosnowiec. She worked in a workshop where they sewed Wehrmacht uniforms. They did not give you a place to live. You had to make your own arrangements. Her second oldest brother, Yankel Ehrenfried, lived there with his wife and 1 child. She stayed there and took the tram to the workshop every day. My Uncle Yankel did business with a Volksdeutsch, a Pole of German descendants. The Germans trusted them. When things got worse, this Volksdeutsch hid my aunt, who had something wrong with her foot, and her child, who was 5 years old. He offered to hide my mother, but she felt that she was young healthy, and she was afraid, so she decided to take her chances. And as much as they knew what was happening, they were in denial. Everyone from that area was taken to Auschwitz. Miraculously, the workers from my mother's workshop were sent to Szatzlar, Czechoslovakia, a camp of about 700 Jewish women. Nobody ever died an unnatural death there. The camp commander, the Lagerführer, was a mensch. They were no longer sewing, but were making rudimentary textiles, similar to burlap, for the war effort. They marched to the factory every day from the barracks. At the factory, she was reunited with her sister, Esther. Esther was not in her barracks. She remained at home with her parents until everyone else was sent to Auschwitz. How she ended up in Szatzlar, we do not know. Her children, my cousins, don't know either, and we never asked, and now there is no one left to ask. My mother, her sister, along with a cousin, Tola Greitzer Slumnicki, were liberated in Szatzlar. The three of them made their way back to Sosnovitz. My aunt and cousin came out of hiding, and the Volksdeutsch that hid them also kept the house for them, and they moved back into their house. One day, they were shopping on the street, and someone who originally came from Sosnovitz and was liberated in Bergen-Belsen came to Sosnovitz to see who survived from his family. He ran into my mother, her sister-in-law, and niece, and told them my Uncle Yankel was alive in Bergen-Belsen. The three of them went to Bergen-Belsen. As I mentioned earlier, my uncle was in the same barracks as my father the last week of the war. That is how my mother met my father. They were married in Bergen-Belsen, and I was born there. My parents had no intentions of coming to America. They had planned to go to Israel, but there was a British blockade in Israel, and they were just waiting in the DP camp. The Joint Distribution Committee had set up kiosks in the camp to sign up to come to America. President Truman released new visas for displaced persons. On a whim, my father filled out one of those forms, and one day a postcard came in the mail that his number came up, and if he did not take advantage of it, he might lose his place. My father thought maybe this was a sign that we should come to America, and we did. We were sent to Detroit by the Joint Distribution Committee. We had no relatives there. Two of my mother's siblings and some cousins that survived settled in the New York, New Jersey area. From my father's huge family, only 3 cousins survived besides him. 2 went to Israel, and 1 ended up in Antwerp. I would like to conclude with 4 important messages. The first, my father never said he survived because he was resourceful or took risks or was one of the lucky ones. He survived because God wanted him to live. Second, my sisters and I had very normal upbringing and childhoods. There were no stigmas. We grew up normally, like any other children growing up in a modern Orthodox home. The third thing I want to tell you is much has been written, and many movies and documentaries have been made about what happened to the Jews during the Shoah. But there is relatively little about what happened to the survivors, the Sheretza Pleta, those who survived after the war. Speaking from my own experience, things were not easy for us. It was not at all like when the Soviet Jews came and Federation set them up with apartments, furniture, dishes, and whatever else they needed. We were boarders in a Jewish woman's home. We lived in one room. We did not speak the language. We had no family support. My father had no job. We had nothing. To the credit of the survivors' resilience, they moved on with their lives. They rebuilt their families, and many became very successful financially and became stalwarts in their community. My father used to say, "You look forward, you move forward, you don't go back." He used the Yiddish expression, "Nora koza geitzrik," only a goat goes back. The last and most important thing I want to leave you with is that in Detroit, we have a well-known Institute of Arts. Attached to it is a film theater. Many years ago, my husband and I went to see a movie there. It was in Hebrew with English subtitles. The name of the movie was Biglal HaMilchama Hahi, because of that war. And I think that says it all. If it was not for that war, my parents would never have met or married. I would not be here. And most important, I believe that the modern state of Israel would not have been established when it was. I know that the ripple effects of the Shoah will be felt for generations to come. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this evening.
Thank you, Toby, for sharing your parents' story. Please rise as Andres Nivash will recite the Kalmole for the Kedoshim.
אל מלא רחמים שוכן במרומים המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמות רבבות אלפי ישראל אנשים ונשים, ילדים וילדות, כולם קדושים וטהורים, שנהרגו ושנשחטו ושנשרפו ושנחנקו ונקברו חיים על קידוש השם על ידי הסוללים הנאצים יימח שמם וזכרם בעבור שאנו מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמותיהם בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם לכן בעל הרחמים ותהא יתרה לעולמים ויצרור ביצור החיים את נשמותיהם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר אמן.
Please be seated. We encourage everyone to light a candle right outside in the atrium as you leave the program. In addition, representatives from the Mizrahi slate are in the atrium to facilitate voting for the World Zionist Organization. Marv will be held upstairs in the main sanctuary following the program. Let us all rise and raise our voices together as Isaac Ben Ishai leads us in the Hatikva, our eternal anthem of hope.
balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homia ulefatei mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia od love the tikva tainu התקווה בת שנות 2000 להיות עמך חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות עמך חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים.
This concludes our program.